I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. I think most people today have a sense that we are a country divided, if not divided physically, at least divided in terms of ideas and how we view things. And there is not a lot of agreement about many things. At one time, politically, our country was pretty simple. You had the Democrats and you had the Republicans, and that was it. But now, even among the Democrats, you have kind of the socialist Democrats and you have the old-line Democrats. And among the Republicans, you have, I think, what's shaping up to be populist Republicans and conservative Republicans and establishment Republicans. So it's not always easy to figure out who is who these days. But that's just really a symptom. What's happening politically is really only a symptom about the lack of consensus in our society. And I want to focus especially on the lack of moral consensus in our society. There is a lack of moral consensus in America today. And part of it, and maybe the real problem of why there's so many divisions, is there's a lack of wanting to get outside of ourselves to love neighbors a little bit more and to respect other people and their opinion, and also a lack of humility and self-criticism. So we are missing this common consensus of morality, and it shows in so many different ways. I think the common morality was chipped at by materialism, which taught us to focus just on this earth. And then consumerism, which taught us to care mainly about ourselves and how we are doing. And kind of along with that, a self-centeredness that focused just on me, so that I become the judge of God and I become the judge of the world. 2 mics are not necessary. And how this shows up is in so many different ways. How we view honesty versus lying. Listen to the political debates as they talk about that. And how we view integrity. And how we view character. And how we view what once was seen as terrible stuff like promiscuity and pornography. Morality is changing quickly. And the price is being paid by families who are breaking apart and by individuals who are breaking apart mentally and morally and spiritually in society that seems to be crumbling in some ways around us. And another symptom of this is the way we look at work. There used to be a consensus that everybody should take a day off. There should be a Sabbath idea, and that is just gone. That's been long gone. And one of our candidates said just the other day that Americans work harder than any other workers on the face of the earth, more than the Japanese, more than the people in Sweden, more than anybody. We work longer hours, we are more productive, and we have the men working and the women working and the teens working, but we don't seem to be able to work enough. We have become, in effect, slaves to our work and slaves to the things that our work buys us. That's what this passage in Isaiah is talking about. It says, I've said, this is the resting place. Let the weary come and rest. This is the place of repose, but you wouldn't listen. And really what he's talking about is you're not listening to me about just taking a breath and laying back and resting in me and trusting in me. Instead, it's all about doing and working and working. What happens when a common consensus of morality deteriorates? I think 4 things happen. One is we determine our own personal morality. What the common thing is, find your morals, find your compass, find where you're supposed to be, and stick with that. So everybody determines their own little morality. And a second thing that happens is lawlessness tends to grow when a moral consensus is missing. Movements tend to prevail. You have more and more movements popping up, trying to find systems of morality, and picky legalism shows its head. So that's what I want to talk a little bit about today during my communion homily, is just when moral consensus goes away, these other things try to take its place, and they can never really do it. And how do we really get there? How do we solve the problem of our different ways of looking at things? First, there's the idea that there's no moral consensus, then we must determine our own morality. You must do what's right for you. I'm okay, you're okay. You do what's right for you, I'll do what's right for me. That seems to be the common consensus of our day. It's in philosophy, they call it postmodernism. You do your thing, I do my thing, and neither one's wrong. Nothing's wrong, everything's right. It's just different. If there is no wrong, if there's nothing wrong, though, then we run into some problems when somebody tries to hurt another person, or when somebody pushes another person down to get ahead. The judges had times like this too. In the times of the judges, after Moses had died and that leader was gone, and Joshua had died and that leader was gone, before there was a king, there was no consensus on morality and no consensus on spirituality. And so everyone did what was right in their own eyes. It said that several times. Everyone does what's right in their own eyes. They make up their own morality to live by. In such a time, and I believe we are in such a time today, it is really, really important as a believer in God that you focus on loving the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loving your neighbor as yourself. Focus on love, the love of God and love of neighbor. A second thing that happens when there is no moral consensus is lawlessness prevails. Crime rates go up, and we have seen that. Despite videos everywhere and video cameras everywhere and security systems everywhere, crime rates are still on the rise. They went down a little bit when the video cameras started popping up, but now they're right back up there again. Because people feel like I can do whatever I want. And even criminals tell us, the reason I broke into that house was they didn't have the lock on, or I just felt like it was, if they didn't lock it up, if they didn't have the security system, it was my right to just go in there and get it. And we've actually found new ways to do bad things. I read yesterday about this neighbor who hacked into their neighbor's nursery monitor that was a camera and a speaker that the parent had set up in the baby nursery, and they had hacked into that nursery monitor and were sending eerie music trying to scare the little toddler in that room and speaking to the toddler. It's just terrible stuff, trying to scare that little baby. What we are missing is moral restraint. What we're missing is what's on the inside that tells us not to do certain things. And laws cannot restrain us morally or spiritually. Laws are just symptoms of our morality. Laws do not make us really moral people. Morality makes laws, and spirituality inspires morals. Do not downplay the role of religion in making the society a better place. It's been proven time and time again historically that when faith has gone up, crime goes down. When faith goes up, morals go up as well. And consensus about morality and what's right and what's wrong goes up as well. The Bible talks about the Holy Spirit as one that holds back lawlessness. The Holy Spirit restrains lawlessness in 1 Thessalonians. The Holy Spirit is the one that helps us to say no to what's wrong, to sexual immorality, or no to dishonesty, or no to being slaves to work or slaves to our sin. The Spirit gives us the power to say no, and it also sets us free. The same Spirit that gives us the power to say no sets us free to be the kind of people we know we ought to be. It gives us encouragement and motivation and strength to do what is right and make the good choices in life. I heard one candidate talk about there's so many, America has more people incarcerated in it today than any other country in all the world. And you know, that's true. There are more people in prison in America per capita than any other country in the whole world. So what do you do about that? Do you just open the prison doors and say, we've got too many people in here, get out of here? Do you just say, well, the things that used to be illegal should now be legal? Or do you say, how do you solve that? You solve it by changing hearts so that people don't want to do crime. A bigger police force does not solve overpopulation in our prison. More laws do not solve overpopulation in our prison. Changing hearts and giving a common consensus to what's right and wrong can empty the prisons out. So, doing what's right in your own eyes, lawlessness, and a third thing that prevails in a lawless society is movement, or movements. We've already mentioned some of them: materialism, living for things; consumerism, living for yourself; environmentalism, living to clean up the environment. You can name 1,000 different isms about things that people are living for and substituting as a way to live their lives. Nietzsche, who was not a believer, said in the 1920s, and he, even though he was not a believer, he respected what religion does for society. And Nietzsche said this: without God, we are left only with forming systems of morality, movements. He predicted this. In the 1930s, in Germany, there was a lack of morality, lack of moral consensus. There was moral anarchy, and there was economic anarchy, and it gave way to the Nazi movement. But this has been proven time and time again. It's also been proven in France. When the king was overthrown in France in the 1700s and the church was overthrown, basically the power of the church, and the phrase liberty, equality, and fraternity was given to the French people. It was kind of do whatever you want. You know what happened is heads began to roll. That's where the guillotine began to become famous. And everybody began to fear that their own heads would roll. And people didn't love each other. They didn't trust each other. They were scared of their neighbor telling on them to the party. The same thing could be said true in the USSR. And out of the French problem came the dictator Napoleon. And out of the communist problem came the dictator Stalin. A fourth thing that happens when there's no moral consensus is people react against the anarchy by making even more rules. As our passage says, this is a very immoral society in Judah at this time. And he said, what you're doing is do this, do that, rule on this, rule for that, a little here, a little there. There are all these rules that are making up, trying to make the society better, and it just doesn't work. Look, there's no extra rules that will make society great. Rules about, I don't care, on either side, rules about immigration, rules about guns will not make society perfect. The extra rules will not solve our problem. What will solve our problem is the grace of Jesus Christ working in our hearts and in our lives. In contrast to the legalism of the Pharisees that said they would strain out a gnat, but then they swallow a camel, Jesus said. They had all these little rules, but they're missing the big rule about being kind to each other and being just and being merciful to each other. And they would tithe the mint and the cumin and the spices, but they wouldn't give to somebody who was really in need. And they made fun of Jesus for healing because he healed on a certain day and in a certain way instead of healing as they thought he should heal. All these different rules were around in Jesus' day, extra rules beyond the Bible that people were just throwing in there because they thought this is how you ought to live. And we're doing that today. Politically correct speech, politically correct actions, all these different invisible rules that everybody violates and nobody can keep. It's exhausting. We have so many hidden rules, and you don't know what the rules really are. Diet rules, exercise rules. Oh, the reason you, and we judge each other by how much weight we've gained or how we're not doing things, or we're not saying things properly. And we set up ourselves as the judge, like Pilate tried to judge Jesus, instead of listening to the Lord. In contrast to this is Jesus Christ, who is full of grace, full of truth, who taught us to love one another, who taught us to love God, who taught us to turn the other cheek, who taught us even to be respectful and kind to those who disagree with us, our enemies. We don't need more laws. We need more God. I need more God. You need more God. We need God to change our hearts. And if he changes our hearts, it will flow over to change other folks' hearts and make this world a better and brighter place. It's not all about the rules and the laws. I was reading about this in a book about a guy named Kyle Idleman was writing about how he looked at marriage. He was newly married. And he said, when I first got married, I thought there were 3 rules that I needed to do. I needed to be faithful to her, I needed to protect her, and I needed to commit to her no matter what. I'd give my life for my wife. Those were the rules that I had about marriage. He said, but about a week into it, I realized there were some other rules I didn't know about. He said, I realized I needed to get my clothes off the floor. I realized that no matter what, I needed to put the toilet seat down all the time. He said, and I also needed to say that even at 2 dresses that looked identical to me and to the male eye, those dresses, I had to pick one that was better than the other. And he said, the 4th thing I realized is I could not listen to my wife and watch SportsCenter at the same time. That was anathema. But he said this. He said, those little rules, I didn't mind doing them. And the reason I didn't mind doing them is I love my wife. I didn't always feel the love, but I had respect for her because I loved her, to do the rules, to please her because I loved her. Jesus Christ did the same thing. He said, if you love me, you will obey my commandments. Luther said, love God and do what you will. And that's kind of a brass statement. But what he meant was, if you love God, you're going to try to please him. It's not all about having this huge rule book. Think about the IRS. Rule on rule, law on law, a little bit here, a little bit there. The tax code used to be like that big. Now the tax code is like this big. And who can understand it? Or I think about the DHEC rules at our day school. It's amazing. When they first opened day schools, this is a great thing to have a day school. So we have this little teeny tiny rule book, but every time a kid got sick or every time a kid gets hurt at another day school or something, they'd add another rule, another layer. So now the day school DHEC rules are like this thick too. And think about political correctness. And think about all the rules that our society is making about what is right and what is wrong. It's exhausting. What we need is a change of heart to do what is right and do